Vladimir Guerrero Jr. wants a contract that spans far beyond 10 years. Will the New York Mets actually get into the mix for his services? I'll talk about that more on today's show.
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans. You're watching Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. If you want to find any of my work, follow me on X at Finkelstein Ryan. You can also find some of my writing at justbaseball.com, where I work as the managing editor. Now, next year, the New York Mets will be in the market potentially for a first baseman. Pete Alonso is on a 2-year deal with an opt-out. If Pete has a good season, he will certainly opt out of that $24 million player option and hit the market again. When he does, he'll be one of 3, actually maybe even 4, very prominent first basemen. Along with Pete, you of course have Vladimir Guerrero Jr., who will be the top free agent on the market. You got Josh Naylor, who is certainly an intriguing free agent that will likely get a pretty solid deal. And then you got from Japan, Munetaka Murakami, who has a ton of hype attached to his name. Big question about what he'll get paid, but he is a slugger coming over from Japan that has a lot of promise. So that is going to be your market. But Vladdy is going to be the figure that the entire market revolves around because he will be heading into his age 27 season. And as Juan Soto just showed us, if you get a free agent at that age, sky is the limit for contract demands because they can try to exceed well beyond 10 years. And with that, they can get a contract that has a total dollar amount that is over $500 million. And for Soto, it was $750 million. But Vladimir Guerrero Jr. has been in a dispute with the Blue Jays over his contract. He wanted to sign an extension, but at his dollar amount, at his demands. So what were those demands? Well, Vladdy has been kind enough to let us all know. He says, quote, "It's much less than Soto. We've always talked about many fewer millions than Soto, more than 100 million less. It was the same number of years, but it didn't reach 600 million. The last number we gave them was a counteroffer that didn't reach 600. He said, no, the business, I lowered the salary demands a bit. I also lowered the number of years. I'm looking for 14. I would like 14, 15, even 20 if they give them to me, but doing it the right way. So if the Blue Jays said, hey, we'll give you $20 million per, so $400 million over 20 years. What do you say, Vladdy? He's going to say no. But the fact that he came down on his demands and that got him to a contract that was 14 years in length or 15 years in length and still over $500 million, where were those demands? And are those demands going to be there again when he hits free agency? The whole point of a free agent market is the bidding on a player can drive the price. Funny enough, Juan Soto talked about that today as well, or yesterday as you're listening to this. He was asked about the free agent pursuit that he went through, and he said there was other teams that are willing to give him more than the $765 million the Mets gave him. And really sort of making it clear that he chose the Mets. He wanted to be a Met. But if he had kept that bidding process going, you never know where the number would have landed. I think Scott Boras might have been able to squeeze $1 billion out of a team at some point just by pitting teams against each other and raising the bid. With Vladdy, he wants to enjoy that type of a market, or he's going to attempt to enjoy that type of a market this time around when he gets to free agency, but will the market be there? I think a team probably caves to some semblance of his demands. Maybe it's only 10 years, not 13 or 14 or 15, but he's going to get a huge deal. And that brings this conversation back to the New York Mets because I've been talking about it all offseason. That the pursuit or the desire for the Mets to go out and get Vladdy is a fan-driven narrative. It is not team-based. The New York Mets did not sign Pete Alonso to a 2-year deal with an opt-out after year 1 because they wanted to get Vladdy. It might be painted that way by a fan base, but that's not what's happening here. That is a negotiation specific to that player. And if Pete Alonso was willing to take an offer that was in line with what the Mets valued him as, which is probably a first baseman that should be getting north of 20, but maybe just less of $25 million per season. If he was willing to take $22 million per, you never know. The Mets might have given him a 4-year deal without opt-outs and been committed to Pete at first base. He wanted more than that. And so they came to terms on a middle ground that made sense for Pete Alonso to get paid this year and then to hit the market again. But this idea that the Mets are going to be in on Vladdy when he wants more than 10 years, you're not paying attention to what they're telling you. And I've talked about this a bunch, but Steve Cohen said it as much in his little media scrum at the beginning of spring training. He talked about how the Mets want to get to a point where they are financially responsible, where they have a reasonable budget, where he doesn't have to pay hundreds of $millions in luxury tax penalties year in and year out. And when asked about Vladdy specifically, he said, "Oh, it's a great player, but those are discussions we'll have next year." And then he immediately said, it's tough to have two guys making huge money on the books at the same time. It's tough to have two Juan Sotos, especially when you still have Francisco Lindor making over $30 million per season. David Stern said on a podcast as well that you only get one shot at signing a generational contract. That there's only a few of these players that are worth investing in. And it's tough to have multiple of those guys on the books at the same time. So, yes, the Mets are now the big bad wolf in free agency, but that doesn't mean they just spend regardless of long-term outlook. And what I've told you all from the beginning is that the New York Mets are hesitant to give their own guy beyond 3 years on a free agent contract because he's a first baseman. What makes you think that they're going to get, admittedly, a better guy, but for 5 times as many years than the 3-year deal that the Mets tried to negotiate with Pete Alonso? The guy that wants 15. I just can't see it, and I've said that from the beginning. It doesn't make sense to me that the New York Mets would choose Vladdy as the next big expenditure when you already have Juan Soto. You don't need a Vladdy. Sure, it'd be a luxury, but what happens in 5 years where neither of them can play a position? What then? You keep him with Vladdy at first base. You're moving Soto to first base. Are you okay with having a DH spot locked up for 10 years? 10 years. If Vladdy falls off in 5 and he can't play first base anymore, that's 10 years that you need to build around a blocked up DH spot. So again, I just don't see it. If you're talking about less than $600 million, that means it's over 500. And if it's $35 million per over 15 years, that is $525 million. If it's $39 million per year over 15 years, that's $585 million. However you slice it, it's a contract that's going to be no less than $35 million per season over more than a decade. It is not happening. Now, is there a world where Vladdy signs with the Mets because the market does not meet his demands and then he starts entertaining shorter-term deals? Absolutely. And that's where I'd say the Mets are going to stay in the mix, and they're going to have their meetings and everything and sell Vladdy on what the Mets are with Juan Soto and everything else. But I don't think that they're going to get to that level. It's very similar to how the Dodgers were in the mix for Juan Soto this offseason. They were there, but did they really put in that full, force push to get him? Or did they know that ultimately he was unlikely to sign there? So they weren't really willing to enter that fray or, get into a potential contract that was more than Ohtani's when they already have Ohtani's on the books. Granted, all of it's deferred basically, but that's a story for another day. I think the latest on Vladimir Guerrero Jr. just continues to confirm what I've been saying this whole time, that the Mets are going to look in a different direction at first base. So could that be bringing back Pete? What I want to talk about in the next segment is an interesting comment from Bryce Harper about Pete Alonso that is pretty curious when it comes to his free agency. So we're going to talk about that before getting to some spring training notes in just a minute. First, though, quick word from our sponsors. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. When the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started, and there's no better place to get in on it than FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game, so even if you miss the opening tip-off or you want to bet on that fourth quarter comeback, you can stay in on the action. Also, if you're looking for a bigger payout, You can even combine your live bets into a same game parlay. I love using FanDuel's live betting feature because it keeps every moment of the game exciting, whether I'm backing my team for a late game rally or I'm picking that player to hit a clutch three. I never feel like I've missed my chance. Plus, the app is super easy to use, and when you win, you get paid instantly. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Stay up to date with all the latest in the world of sports when you check out Locked On Sports Today, streaming 24/7 on YouTube. And if you're watching on YouTube, do me a favor, hit that subscribe button. Our next goal is to get to 13,000 subscribers by opening day. We're inching closer and closer. Appreciate all of you who do me that favor and subscribe. All right, let's talk a little bit about Pete Alonso and Bryce Harper. Bryce Harper was recently asked about ever moving back into the outfield, and he said, yeah, I'd consider it. And he actually mentioned how he went to Phillies brass this offseason and said, hey, if you want to go sign Pete Alonso, I'm okay to move back into the outfield. It's very interesting because the Phillies are in a spot where they got this core together for this upcoming season. And then there's some question marks. Who is going to be part of this team in 2026 and beyond? And you have Kyle Schwarber, who's a free agent. Nick Castellanos, he might have one more year. Yeah, I think he signed a 5-year deal and Schwarber got 4. So I think he's got one more year. You have JT Realmuto, who's going to hit free agency as well. So you have a couple different guys who are big members of this team that are set to hit the market. And that would put the Phillies potentially back in the market for some top free agents. Bryce Harper sliding back into right field or left field for Pete Alonso is very interesting. The fact that he even broached that topic is something to think about. Now, they'll have a DH spot open. So if they wanted to, they could sign Pete Alonso next offseason and keep Bryce Harper at first base. But it is interesting to hear Harper throw that out there because everyone sort of assumed, he's a first baseman for the rest of his career. He's saying not so fast. I would move out there for the right player. And I really think that the Phillies are a team that could very well get in the mix for Pete Alonso a year from now because of Schwarber potentially leaving in the DH spot being open, because I think they're not going to necessarily say, you know what, we have Trey on the books forever. We got Bryce on the books forever. Let's go get Vladdy. I just don't think that's the spot for them. And so if you're looking for an impact bat, Pete Alonso might be the guy for them. And so that'll be an interesting thing to follow next year. Does Pete Alonso seriously consider going to the Phillies? And how would the Mets respond to that? Are the Mets going to try to bring Pete back, or were they very comfortable to structure this contract hoping he'd opt out and they can just wave goodbye? Now, I don't think that they're going to wave goodbye for Vladdy, but I think if Brett Beatty hits this year and can solidify third base, the Mets might be comfortable saying, all right, we're going to try that Vientos at first thing again. If Ryan Clifford has an outstanding season that ends in Syracuse where he's tearing the cover off the ball, are you going to look at Clifford and say, well, next year he can be our first baseman? Ronnie Mauricio, is he going to get into the mix at a third base? And then what would that mean for the Mets outlook? So I really think this next year is about learning what you have with this club. I mean, obviously you're trying to win a World Series, but as far as some of the secondary goals, I think the Mets are looking at this year and they're hoping that they can have an answer on their young players, have an answer on a Brett Beatty, an answer on Ronnie Mauricio, an answer on Luis Acuna. And that's why you don't re-sign Jose Iglesias and you let Iglesias go to the Padres. Have I talked about that on this show? I don't know if I have. For those of you who missed it, Jose Iglesias got a minor league deal with the Padres, but it'll pay him $3 million if he makes the club, plus like $1 million in incentives. So not the worst deal for Iglesias, but certainly far less than we would have expected him to sign. You might say, why didn't the Mets do it? Well, they didn't do it because they want to leave that roster flexibility to potentially have a Brett Beatty make the opening day roster, to have Luis Acuna play large stretches at second base or in a super utility role, to have Ronnie Mauricio get his opportunities at some point this season. That's what they want. They want these kids to get a shot. And then that will inform you on what the best direction is moving forward. Because if you can solve a position with cost control young players instead of an aging first baseman and Pete Alonso, that might be the direction the Mets go. But as we sort of close the book here on today's show, talking about a future free agent market, I just want to reiterate one last time, it doesn't make sense for the Mets to sign Vladdy. It really doesn't. Their best options are either to pursue a team-friendly deal with Pete Alonso a year from now, and who knows if he would be amenable to that, or if your youth proves enough, to trust the youth and to trust that you can fill third base with either Beatty or Mauricio, and you can slide Mark Vientos over to first. But to make that decision, you're going to have to see great improvements from the young players, and that's what this year is about. Whether it's playing in AAA or getting your little spurts on the big league roster, these guys will have to make the most of these opportunities. Otherwise, you have to continue to hedge against them by bringing in free agents like Pete Alonso. And if they can't show it at the big league level, that also puts them in a weird spot with their trade value. So the Mets really need these young guys to take these opportunities and run with them, not only because it will help them building out future rosters, but it also really informs them on what to do with those young players and whether to try to push some of them at the deadline or how to best navigate a tough situation when you're still trying to win now and win now every single year. But you want that sustainable future where if you can find a guy like Vientos this past year that solidifies a position on the diamond for you for 4 years in the arbitration system where you're not going to pay that guy an exorbitant amount of money, it's a massive win for the organization. So will they find any more of those wins that push Pete Alonso out of town? That is a possibility, but one that I view as a lot more likely than the possibility that the Mets are going to say no to Pete. Oh, you opted out. We're not going to negotiate. We're going to go all in on Vladdy. And hey, 15 years, $585 million. That's nothing. We're signing him. I just don't envision that. Anyway, in the next segment, I want to talk about spring training a little bit. Paul Blackburn on the rough start. So we're going to go through that to close out the show. First, though, a quick word from our sponsors. If you're an everyday listener to the show, make sure you become a Locked On Mets Insider. This is our texting service where you get updates from me anytime news breaks in the Mets. You can ask me questions anytime. You can also take part in our Locked On Mets sign photo giveaways. If you want to be Locked On Mets Insider, find the link in the episode description. Go to subtext.com/LockedOnMets. Paul Blackburn had another rough outing on Friday night. Went 2 1/3, allowed 3 runs on 5 hits, 2 walks, 2 homers. Did not have a single strikeout. First inning, Blackburn worked around a walk. Second inning, gave up a walk and a base hit, but thanks to Francisco Alvarez throwing out a base runner, the Mets were able to get out of the inning without any damage. So Blackburn was walking the tightrope well enough. Goes into the third inning with a clean book in regards to giving up runs. But then after getting the first out, he gave up a solo homer, then a base hit, then a 2-run homer. All of a sudden, he's knocked out of the game, basically. I think he had one more single again after that home run. And then the Mets said, all right, that's enough. They put in Max Kranick. So Max Kranick, the guy we've talked about a lot on this show throughout spring training, who has really shined as a bulk inning reliever for the New York Mets, a guy that I think is definitely angling to make this team. He throws a wild pitch, the runner advances to second base. But then he got 2 strikeouts to get out of that inning for Paul Blackburn. Following inning, he works around a leadoff double and does not give up a run. So over 7 innings now pitched in spring training, Max Kranick has given up just 4 hits, has not walked a batter, has 8 strikeouts, has not given up a run. He's been unbelievable. He should make this team. On the other end of the spectrum, Paul Blackburn has pitched 4 2/3 over 3 starts. He's allowed 6 runs, or 6 earned runs, 7 runs overall. On 8 hits, 4 walks, only has a single strikeout. I'm pretty concerned about these results. Now, you see Paul Blackburn, Carlos Mendoza, both throwing cold water on the idea that these results are anything to read into. They're just talking about him being healthy and able to pitch, and that's all fine and well, but I just don't know if I fully believe that Paul Blackburn and Griffin Canning are going to get the job done. And I think it could be a massive hole in this roster if those guys can't figure it out. So you see Paul Blackburn really struggling in spring training, and it's confirmation bias. If you don't believe in him, you're saying, yeah, look at him. He's not good. And he could say, oh, the results don't matter. We're just worried about my body, getting myself ready and right. That's fine. But in the matter of 3 batters, CJ Abrams and Dylan Cruz took you deep. This is a team that absolutely can steal some games for the Mets this year. And if you have Paul Blackburn on the mound serving up, pitches on a tee for these guys, and they're hitting home runs and they're scoring a bunch of runs, you're going to lose those games. And those games can come back and haunt you in this division. I think the Nationals are probably the team right now, if you're looking at this division, that really can play spoiler in a way that makes them the deciding factor in this division. Because let's just say the Braves across 13 games go 11-2 against the Nationals, but the Mets and the Phillies each only win 4 or 5 games, and then the division race comes down to a couple games at the end of it. The ability to beat up on the bad teams in your division is a key thing. And so having these fifth starters or swingmen type making consistent starts for you, it puts you in a potential compromising position where you might give up a 4 spot early in the game, and then you're fighting an uphill battle the entire time. So I'm not going to read too much into this and say, oh, Blackburn can't get the job done. I was a fan of the move last year because it was very under the radar, and the Mets didn't have to give up to get him. And then we watched the first couple starts, and it was excellent. And I said, okay, I can kind of see what the Mets vision was here. So far in spring, haven't seen that vision, but it is spring training. So I'll be curious to see how he progresses in his next couple starts. Can he figure this thing out? And then, of course, I think he's got a great shot to break camp with the team as part of the opening day rotation. They haven't given Griffin Canning a start yet. I don't know what to make of that. Does that mean that he's a reliever and the Mets are just looking at him as the long man in this bullpen? Potentially. And then Blackburn and McGill can both make the team. So we'll see exactly how all of that shakes out. But I'm looking at Paul Blackburn right now, and I got a lot of concern. I got a lot of concern about how he's not striking out any batters. That's a big one. How he's getting hit so hard. And what's going to actually be different when the season rolls around and teams are putting better lineups out there that can make you pay a little more than this one can. Or anyone in spring can, I should say. Now, granted, there was still a lot of the prominent hitters in that lineup in spring for the Nationals, but there's a difference between spring training competition and regular season competition. And if you're really struggling in spring training competition, what exactly makes you think that you're going to just hit the regular season and it's all going to wash away? It might, but I don't know if I can count on that. So that's where I'm at with Paul Blackburn. Other than that, there wasn't many big takeaways from the game, other than the fact that Max Kranick was excellent again. Francisco Alvarez got an RBI hit. He's really been struggling, so good to see him have that positive moment. Alex Canario doubled and scored a run. Canario, the guy that Mets got in that trade with the Cubs where they sent out some cash to bring in a right-handed outfielder at 24 years old that has some upside. If Starling Marte starts the year on the IL, I'd imagine that Canario would get a spot. Otherwise, the Mets are going to try to force him through waivers. But, good to see him finally tap into some of that power. Jose Azocar drove him in. Azocar, another guy that's out of options on the 40 that is playing really well this spring, but still unlikely to make the roster. That's what we have going on here in spring training. There's nothing else major. Mets just going about their business, trying to get through the final 2.5 weeks here. Sean Manaea is going to get some more imaging done soon here, so we'll know about that in the coming days about if he's going to resume his throwing program, and then you can sort of start to set a timetable for his return, whether that is mid-April or late April or even early May. We'll see how all that ends up coming together. But that's going to be all for today's show. I'll be back with another show tomorrow if there's some news item to discuss, or if there's someone that has a big game that's worth talking about in spring training. Otherwise, I'll see you all on Monday. As always, thank you for listening. Make sure you follow, rate, and review wherever you get your podcast. Follow me on X at Finkelstein Ryan. Follow the show at Locked On Mets. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listener, your first watch every day. Now for your second watch, head over to YouTube and check out the first ever 24/7 streaming channel that covers everything in the world of sports, talking about Locked On Sports Today with our local hosts from each team, league-wide hosts from each league. Find Locked On Sports Today streaming 24/7 on YouTube.